The stairs descended in a gentle spiral, worn smooth by countless footfalls over countless years. Thessaly of the still waters traced her fingers along the cool stone wall as she went down, feeling the familiar comfort of ritual settle over her shoulders like a well-loved cloak. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying the faint scent of star moss and something else. Something like the smell of sleep itself, if sleep could have a fragrance. Sweet, peaceful, home. In the darkness below, the tapestry waited. She had made this descent every night for 7 years, ever since the elder Menders had recognized her gift for finding the small disturbances in the weave, the places where one dreamer's night visions tangled with another's. The work suited her. It required patience, gentleness, attention to the subtle language of thread and tension. It required no grand gestures, no bold pronouncements, only care. The Charichambi opened before her like a vast exhale. Here, in this sacred hollow beneath the dreaming halls, the great tapestry of Somnastra hung suspended in the darkness, stretching beyond sight in all directions. 10,000 threads. No, more than that. Always more, glimmered with their own soft light. Blues like twilight water, golds like honey in sunlight, silvers that reminded her of frost on winter grass. Each thread was a dreamer's pathway through the night, and together they formed something greater than their individual shimmer. A constellation of human rest, a map of every sleeping soul in Somnastra. Thessaly breathed in slowly, letting the hum of the tapestry fill her ears. It was always there, that sound. Not quite music, not quite silence. Like the resonance of a bell long after it's been struck, or the way wind sounds in a seashell. The threads sang to each other in frequencies just beyond hearing, and if she held very still, she could almost understand what they were saying. She began her rounds in the southern quadrant, as always. Here the threads ran in familiar patterns, dreams of harvest and hearthfire, the gentle anxieties of village life. A loop had formed where a child's nightmare of being lost in the market had caught on an elderly woman's memory of searching for her own mother. Decades passed. Thessaly's fingers moved with practiced delicacy, finding the point of tension, easing the loop free. The threads sighed under her touch, grateful. The child's dream smoothed into something softer. The old woman's memory settled back into its proper place. This was what she was good at. This small, necessary work. She moved westward, then north, finding the usual tangles and knots. A fear caught on a hope. A memory snagging on a wish. She smoothed them all, her fingers sure and steady, her breathing aligned with the tapestry's slow pulse. The work was meditation. The work was prayer. But when she reached the eastern quadrant, everything changed. The wrongness struck her first as a chill, as if she'd walked into a winter wind. The threads here hung differently, slack in some places, too taut in others. And there, near the center of the eastern weave, was the tear. Thessaly had seen tears before. Threads broke sometimes. That was the nature of things. Illness could snap a thread. Deep grief could fray one. Death severed them cleanly, leaving ends that had to be carefully woven back into the larger pattern. But this... This was something else entirely. The tear was perhaps the length of her forearm, a darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the surrounding threads. Its edges weren't frayed or broken. They were raw, almost deliberate, as if something had reached into the tapestry and torn it open with purposeful hands. The threads around it recoiled, curling away from the wound like fingers pulling back from flame. And at the center of the tear, there was nothing. Not the darkness of absence, but the darkness of void. A hole that went deeper than the tapestry, deeper than the chamber, perhaps deeper than the dreaming world itself. Thessaly's heart began to beat faster. She had never felt fear in the chamber before. The chamber was safety. The chamber was order and peace, and the gentle work of keeping the world's dreams whole. But now, looking at this impossible tear, she felt something cold unfold in her chest. She reached out, slowly, her hand trembling slightly, just to assess, just to understand. Her fingers came within a breath of the nearest thread, and the thread recoiled from her touch. Thessaly gasped and pulled her hand back. In 7 years of mending, she had never felt that. The threads always welcomed her touch, always responded to her care. But these threads, the ones surrounding the tear, wanted nothing to do with her. They shivered away as if she carried some contagion. She tried again, approaching from a different angle, using the softest touch she knew. The result was the same. The threads pulled away, and the tear remained, drinking light, radiating that terrible cold absence. Thessaly stood there for a long time, her mind racing through every lesson the Elder-Menders had taught her, every technique she'd learned. Nothing prepared her for this. Nothing explained it. The wrongness of it settled into her bones. Oh, this wasn't just a problem she couldn't solve. This was something that shouldn't exist. And the fact that it did exist, here in the heart of the tapestry, meant that something fundamental had changed. She didn't know what to do with that knowledge, so she did the only thing she could. And waited for dawn, and then she climbed the spiral stairs to find the Elder-Menders. Elders kept their chambers at the top of the western tower, where the first light of morning touched the dreaming halls. Thessaly found them in their circular room, already awake, already waiting. Somehow, she wasn't surprised. The three of them sat in their high-backed chairs like ancient trees, their faces lined with decades of tending the great work. Elder Marta, whose hands were still the surest at the finest threads. Elder Corin, who could hear disturbances in the weave from 3 rooms away. And Elder Senna, the eldest, whose eyes had gone milk-white years ago, but who saw the tapestry more clearly than anyone. "There's a tear," Thessaly said, her voice smaller than she intended. "In the eastern quadrant. I don't know how to mend it." The elders exchanged glances. Even Elder Senna, with her blind eyes, seemed to look at the others. A whole conversation passed between them in that silence, a conversation Thessaly couldn't hear. "We know," Elder Marta said finally, her voice heavy with something Thessaly couldn't name. Sorrow, perhaps, or resignation. "We've been feeling it for 3 nights now," Elder Corin added, waiting to see if it would heal itself, or if... He trailed off, But Elder Senna finished the thought, or if it would call to someone. Thessaly's breath caught. Call to someone? I don't understand. You found it, Elder Senna said, turning her white eyes in Thessaly's direction. That means something. The tapestry doesn't reveal such wounds to just anyone. I don't want. Thessaly began, but the words tangled in her throat. What was she going to say? That she didn't want to be special? That she only wanted to do her quiet work and belong in this place that had given her purpose? Elder Marta stood, moving to the window where dawn light spilled across the floor in golden bands. There is a place, she said softly, spoken of in the oldest records. The forgotten shrine, in the waking lands beyond the valley. It's where the first dreams were woven, before the tapestry existed, before we learned to gather them all together. You must go there, Elder Corinne said. Thessaly felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. But I'm just a mender. I've never left the dreaming halls. I don't know anything about… You know enough, Elder Senna interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. You know how to listen to threads. You know how to find what's broken. That will have to be sufficient. But what am I looking for? Thessaly's hands twisted together, seeking something to hold on to. What caused the tear? How do I fix it? The elders were quiet for a long moment. Then Elder Marta turned from the window, and Thessaly saw something in her expression that frightened her more than the tear itself. Uncertainty. We don't know, the elder said. We only know this. Some things that unravel were meant to, and some things that were torn away. Perhaps they were torn away for a reason we've forgotten. Elder Senna rose from her chair, moving with the careful grace of someone who knew every inch of the room by heart. She crossed to Thessaly and placed both hands on the younger woman's shoulders. Her touch was warm, steady. The tapestry chose you to see this wound, she said quietly. Trust that. Trust yourself. And remember, mending isn't always about putting things back the way they were. Sometimes it's about understanding why they came apart. Thessaly wanted to argue, to refuse, to run back down the spiral stairs to the chamber where everything made sense. But she looked into Elder Senna's blind eyes and saw something there that stilled her protests. Faith. The elder had faith in her. She didn't know if she had faith in herself. But perhaps that was something she'd have to find along the way. When do I leave? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Now, Elder Corinne said, the tear is growing. We can feel it. Whatever you're going to find, you need to find it soon. And so, as the sun rose fully over the dreaming halls, Thessaly of the still waters prepared to leave the only home she'd known, to journey into the waking lands in search of a shrine she'd only heard whispered about in fragments of old stories. She packed light, a traveler's cloak, bread and cheese, a water skin. And carefully, reverently, she took one small thread from the tapestry's edge, winding it around her wrist like a promise, a reminder of what she was trying to protect. The thread glowed softly against her skin, warm and alive. She touched it once, gathering her courage, and then she walked out into the morning, toward the eastern road, toward the unknown, carrying the weight of a question she didn't yet know how to ask. The door from the chamber opened not onto stone steps, but onto twilight itself. Thessaly paused at the threshold, feeling the world tilt and settle into something new. For her that stretched a land she had touched only in dreams, the borders between sleeping and waking made manifest. She took her first step onto a path that shimmered like oil on water, its surface reflecting colors that had no names in the waking world. The air tasted of honey and salt. Sweet promise and old tears mingled on her tongue. Around her, meadows of silver grass rippled in a wind she couldn't feel, each blade whispering with voices, fragments of sleepers' thoughts, the murmur of 1,000 dreaming minds. She walked forward, and the grass parted before her like water. Above, the sky held neither sun nor stars, but something in between, a luminous pearl gray that cast no shadows. Time felt different here, elastic and strange. Each breath stretched longer than it should. Each step covered distance that couldn't be measured. In the distance, she saw forests where trees grew from woven shadow and captured starlight, their branches heavy with dreams that had not yet found their dreamers. The pull in her chest, that thread sense that had guided her work for years, tugged her forward, deeper into this gossamer realm. And the world shifted around her like watercolor in rain, bleeding at the edges. Beautiful and uncertain, she passed through a valley where forgotten lullabies drifted like mist, their melodies incomplete, searching for the children who had once needed them. The songs wrapped around her ankles, cool and insubstantial, and she felt tears prick her eyes, though she couldn't say why. Further on, she crossed a bridge made entirely of sighs, each plank a breath of longing or relief, transparent and surprisingly solid beneath her feet. The bridge arched over a river that flowed upward, its waters climbing toward a sky that seemed to welcome them home. And everything here felt both impossible and achingly right, as if this place had always existed just beyond the corner of her vision, waiting. As the path wound deeper, the landscape grew quieter, more intimate. The whispers faded to a gentle susurrus, like distant waves. The colors deepened into twilight blues and soft purples, the shades of dusk and dreams. And then she saw it, carved into the side of a hill that seemed to breathe. The Shrine of Remembrance. Small, unassuming, a doorway shaped like a sleeping eye, framed in moonstone that glowed with its own gentle light. Thessaly had known of this place in the abstract way a mender knows the tapestry's full scope, aware it existed, always mending around it, never truly looking. But now she stood before it, and recognition moved through her like a slow tide. Her hands trembled. The thread pull in her chest had become almost painful, insistent. She stepped forward, and the moonstone doorway opened like a lid lifting from a dreaming eye. Inside, the chamber was small enough to feel like an embrace. The walls curved inward, lined with countless alcoves, each one cradling threads. But these were not the bright, purposeful threads of the tapestry. These were deep indigo and storm gray, midnight blue, and the purple of old bruises. They pulsed with a slow, steady heartbeat, the rhythm of grief that endures, that does not fade, but only deepens with time. thousands upon thousands of them, carefully preserved, still vital, still aching. Thessaly's breath caught. Understanding flooded through her with terrible gentleness. These were the threads her people had removed, the sorrows they could not bear, the losses they had chosen to forget rather than carry, and all the grief the Menders had ever taken, collected here, still alive, still waiting. She moved between the alcoves, drawn by something she couldn't name. Her fingers hovered over the threads without touching, feeling their warmth, their pulse. Each one was a story of love and loss. Each one held a name, a face, a wound too deep to heal. And then she saw it. When one thread nestled in an alcove at the chamber's heart, glowing faintly with a light she recognized. Her own hand, Uletant's, reached for it before her mind could catch up. The moment her fingers touched it, memory moved through her like a wave breaking against stone. Her sister. Her sister's laugh, bright as morning bells, and her sister's hand in hers, small and trusting, and her sister's last breath, soft as snow falling. The grief she had asked the Menders to take, the mourning she couldn't carry, the wound she had spent years smoothing over instead of feeling. It was all here, alive, waiting. Thessaly sank to her knees, the thread clutched against her heart, and wept for the first time in 7 years. The chamber of weaving welcomed Thessaly back with its familiar coolness, but she was no longer the mender who had left it. The great tapestry stretched before her, luminous and trembling, its frayed edges whispering in the still air. In her hands, the thread she had woven from her own unspoken grief pulsed gently, dark as midnight water, shimmering with the silver of tears she had never allowed herself to shed. She approached slowly, reverently, her footsteps soft against the stone floor, worn smooth by centuries of menders. The thread felt warm between her fingers, alive with a truth she had spent years trying to smooth away. For so long, she had believed her purpose was to erase the dark threads, to keep the tapestry bright and unblemished. But now, standing before the fraying edges, she saw what had been invisible to her before. The tapestry was too bright, too smooth, too relentlessly joyful. Where the fabric unraveled, she could see the hollow places, gaps in the weave where sorrow should have been woven, but had been carefully, methodically removed. Generation after generation of menders, all of them doing what she had done, pulling out the dark threads like weeds from a garden. They had meant well, they had meant to help. But in creating this false perfection, they had weakened the very fabric they sought to protect. Thessaly's hands trembled as she lifted her grief thread to the tapestry. The urge to hide it, to tuck it beneath layers of gold and silver, rose in her chest like an old habit. But she breathed through it, feeling the weight of the thread, honoring what it carried. This was her sorrow for her mother, for the words never spoken, for the love that had lived in silence. This was her grief for all the years she had spent smoothing away pieces of herself. She would not hide it anymore. With careful, deliberate movements, she began to weave. The dark thread slipped through the luminous fabric, visible and true. a current of midnight running through rivers of gold and silver. Her fingers, which had trembled at first, grew steady as she worked. The thread knew where it belonged. It found its place in the pattern as naturally as water finds its way downhill. And then, something miraculous began to happen. The fraying slowed. The edges that had been pulling apart, unraveling despite all her previous attempts to mend them, grew still. Thessaly paused, her breath catching, as she watched the tapestry respond to her weaving. The fabric seemed to sigh, to settle, as if it had been waiting for this moment. But there was much more. From deep within the tapestry, other threads began to emerge. Dark threads, midnight blues and storm grays. Threads of grief that had been suppressed, but never truly gone. They rose to the surface like roots pushing through soil, intertwining with her thread, strengthening the weave. The tapestry had been holding this sorrow all along, carrying it in its depths, weakened by the burden of keeping it hidden. Now, given permission to be seen, the grief threads wove themselves into the pattern with a rightness that made Thessaly's eyes sting with unshed tears. They did not dim the golden threads of joy or tarnish the silver strands of contentment. Instead, they gave those brighter threads something to hold to, something to anchor against. The dark and the light wove together, creating a pattern more complex, more beautiful, more true than anything she had seen before. The tapestry breathed. She could feel it, the rise and fall of the fabric, as if it were a living thing drawing breath for the first time in centuries. It was no longer a fragile fantasy, a perfect illusion that could tear at the slightest touch. It was resilient now, real, a living record of the full spectrum of feeling, the complete truth of what it meant to be human. Thessaly wove until her grief thread was fully integrated, until the dark current she had carried ran true and strong through the luminous whole. When she finally stepped back, her hands were empty. But her heart, for the first time in years, perhaps for the first time ever, felt full. She understood now. She was not whole because she had conquered her sorrow. She was whole because she had given it a place to belong. The chamber of weaving was silent around her, but it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of completion, of balance restored. The pre-dawn light was beginning to seep through the high windows, turning the stone walls soft and gray. Soon, the other menders would arrive for their daily work. They would see what she had done. They would have questions. But Thessaly was not afraid. She had woven her truth into the tapestry, and the tapestry had accepted it, had strengthened because of it, had breathed. She touched the tapestry one last time, her fingers gentle against the place where her dark thread ran through the light. The fabric was warm beneath her hand, alive and whole. She could feel other griefs waiting in the depths, other sorrows that had been hidden away. And she knew that in time, they too would rise to be woven true. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. But it had finally truly begun. Thessaly turned away from the tapestry, her footsteps light, as she walked toward the chamber's entrance. The stone floor felt different beneath her feet. Or perhaps she was different, and that changed everything. Behind her, the great tapestry hung in the growing light, breathing softly, its dark threads and bright threads woven together in a pattern that was no longer perfect, but was finally, completely real.